welcome to LeftOut, your audio distribution for a popular revolution. I'm Nova.
And I'm Global Anarchist. Right, well, there's a bit coming up politically. I suppose we can talk about the Berkeley riots, the Battle of Berkeley, as it's sometimes referenced. That was, happened recently.
Yeah. Whew,
I mean,
that was like a few days ago, I think.
It was a few days ago. It's an interesting thing to talk about because, I've heard from certain circles that it may be considered the first two, the left definitely won. And potentially that this one was one where the right mobilized and they came out with a victory. But I'd suggest otherwise. I'd suggest that, the right was planning on having a rally and a march and that they failed to do that.
Yeah.
Instead, there was a fight and we prevented that march and rally from happening.
Yeah. It's a matter of usually we're able to shut them down so easily that I think anything short of completely routing them doesn't seem like a complete victory.
But, yeah, right.
I did want to say though, something that doesn't seem to be in the narrative very much is that these were fascists from across the country. It's not just Berkeley. They really organized to be able to do this. And whereas all of our Antifa was just the people in Berkeley. So you have a national mobilization of fascists against a local mobilization of anti-fascists. And it's still, they're still, fighting pretty tooth and nail.
I was still able to prevent them from organizing in the way in which they wanted to.
Yeah. And there were about equal numbers, too.
So obviously they're a little bit more prepared, and I think that's the right that is going to start to be, more prevalent and more organized and bolder, right? And I think that certainly has to do with the election of Trump and
in
the
a way,
effects
I
of that
think
is certainly
a lot of us were waiting for this to happen because fascists always come with their popular auxiliary troops, the non-state right, or whatever you'd like to call them.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of just happening now. We thought it might have happened a little earlier. I think we just need to be prepared for that. But I think what Berkeley demonstrated is that as a left we are, I know over in Australia, whenever things similar occur, the left far outweighs the right. We've definitely got more of a prevalence, and I think that's important to know that globally we rarely can do this, mobilize and attack the right much more effectively than they can. They have the political gains, but I suppose that's indicative of the nature of politics.
Yeah, I mean, like, the Republican Party didn't nearly do as much as the Democrats did to, sort of hamstring their own populist candidate, Bernie Sanders. But beyond that, I want to say that I think the left kind of gets the idea that we're not as popular as we actually are. Because we're never on TV. Our stories are never really getting told except through podcasts like this one. Even the right is more acknowledged. But also they're able to make their numbers appear much larger than they are, especially online. They use bots and they use sock puppet accounts. And, I think a major reason we don't do this is because we like to have an accurate view of what we're capable of.
I think we're more genuine. And I think that's reflective in fights on the streets, because generally the turnout from the left on the streets is indicative somewhat more so of the numbers we have, whereas the right seems and appears to be much bigger than it is. And when you compare to their... you can see that when they tend
to have more resources, so they can get people across the country. Because they have nothing against working within capitalism or scamming people. The whole
And they
pickup
usually have the
artist
money.
community is, if you want to call it a community, is just basically a few scam artists writing books that more or less amount to the advice to just keep trying. Oh, and be a dick
Yeah,
about it.
right.
Um,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
so a lot of these leading figures of the right are essentially scam artists, just people selling a certain story. Even Alex Jones, famous conspiracy theorist, had to come out on in court through his lawyer and say that uh, the Alex Jones on Infowars is just a character.
Which is incredible. It's almost, it
You know,
shows
in
that.
yeah, sorry, you go.
No, I was just gonna say it shows the lengths they're willing to go
Yeah.
to sort of try and manipulate people in a way that
Oh,
sort of steers them from proper leftist anti-establishment views, as
and
opposed to these
Tommy,
bullshit
yeah.
NWO
Oh,
anti-establishment
and
quote
this is
unquote.
actually what I've been my recent episode of the web show I do is actually the one that's about to come out on Saturday is going to be about the NWO and why it doesn't hold up as a legitimate revolutionary theory. Because a lot of
Yeah,
people
right.
who buy into that, they want to fight back, but they're being tricked.
Yeah.
The
No,
whole
yeah.
story has a historical basis in overturning revolutionary struggles.
Right, and it reminds me kind of divide and conquer.
Yeah,
Dividing those that may want change into people that are genuine about it, people that believe they're genuine about it, but are inherently disingenuous because of the beliefs that they hold, to sort
yeah,
of divide those that could actually make a change. So,
and
so, so it's interesting how that works that way.
there's these great videos I was just watching on YouTube too that go into semiotics, which is um more or less kind of like the study of messages as signs. Signs being not only words or symbols, but basically anything that holds a communicative message within it. So, sort of what you see a lot with fascists is what are called mythic signs, which is when it's based on a more genuine message that's about something specific, like say Black Lives Matter, and the mythic sign takes the format of it, the relevancy of it, but injects its own message. So, like the Pepsi commercial, for instance, that everyone got pissed off about, would be a
Yeah.
mythic sign. That even the protest was just people holding up signs like "Join the conversation in unity." Like, what the hell are you even protesting?
Yeah. No, it shows that the way the liberal media wants to depict protests,
Yeah.
almost take credit for them. Recently, I can't find the exact. I think it was in February, maybe in March. Hillary Clinton said something along the lines of taking credit for the resistance towards Trump.
Oh my
And then trying to
God.
direct that into being for the conversation, which is just absurd. It's got nothing to do with the Democrats. This has nothing to, we're
They're
completely
so
opposed to their
irrelevant.
point of view too.
They even said outright, one of their people said, "We don't have a problem with policy, we have a problem with branding." They look at us as just a bunch of people who need to be fooled into voting for them. It's
Completely. I think that's historically indicative. I mean, you
yeah.
look at Obama. He just normalized things through his charisma and his nice sounding voice,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And the portrayal that he got in the media was so forgiving. Whereas Trump is a lot more brazen about the type of war crimes
Yeah,
that
I've always
U.S.
said
presidents commit all the time.
yeah, fascists do in the light what liberals do in the dark.
Yeah. I think that sort of sums up that situation pretty well. However, with the recent bombings of Syria, the liberal media is applauding Trump for what he's doing,
Yeah,
which is just,
it
I
really
mean, such a
shows how the Democrats are just a war hawk party. They're,
completely.
liberals themselves, they like to wear the aesthetic of being a, whatever word they have for it, progressive or, some
Yeah,
meaningless garbage, better than
yeah,
conservative. And that's all it really ends up amounting to is we're better than Republicans. It's like, yeah,
yeah.
it's not a very, that bar is fucking buried in the ground. You don't even have to try to hop over it.
Yeah, completely. No, it really shows, and I think I mean, just on a quick reflection on the U.S. elections, Hillary Clinton's line in
Hmm.
America is already great, in comparison
Yeah,
to Trump's. I mean, in retaliation to Trump's, really shows they've got no interest in making change for the people. They're
yeah,
hardly progressive, and in a way, it's actually a conservative position to suggest that the country that you're running for is already great, therefore it needs to stay the same.
yeah. No,
It
it
needs to
is an
be
inherently
conserved.
conservative position, and that's the funny thing is, she was the conservative in a race between a conservative and an outright reactionary. Like,
Yeah,
it,
completely.
American politics have just skewed so far right, um, that Bernie Sanders, who was essentially just an Eisenhower Democrat, like, or a Republican or
Hmm.
whatever, I don't know what Eisenhower was either way, but I I know some history, but I don't pay attention to that shit. So, but he had very, like, 50 years ago, people had just gone like, yeah, of course, all that stuff. It's just,
Yeah,
uh,
he was a Republican, by the way.
oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
but like that itself kind of shows that, if your policy is exactly like Republicans 50 years ago, you're basically the outright, definition of conservative.
hmm I think it's also interesting to note that both in the 2008 and 2016 election, though the candidates that called, sorry, for change, obviously it was a disingenuous call, but
Hmm.
that was their line, actually ended up winning the election, which suggests to me the American people, from an outside perspective,
Hmm.
looking in, the American people sort of want that change, but because there's a lack of a prominent left, that's unable to be harnessed, and it often appears in either your average neoliberal politics or
Yeah.
reactionary politics, and it's just going to keep changing without a presence of a left where those sentiments of wanting real and radical change can actually be realized. So it's
Yeah.
just interesting how the
And
lack of a left there can really cause this reactionary, or not cause it, but have something to do with the rise of this reactionary politics. And I
yeah.
don't think I think that's a deliberate ploy by the neoliberal establishment, especially if you look at the fact that, Trump's podium got more airtime than Bernie Sanders
Yeah.
did on
Oh,
CNN throughout the
I
entire election.
I've seen the memo itself from Hillary Clinton's campaign to the DNC, outlining how they had told their media ties to take Trump seriously because they called him a Pied Piper candidate. In the primaries, their plan was to um, get it to be one of three candidates they thought was too far right for the general election. So they chose Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, and Donald Trump. And it outright said we're telling the media to take these people seriously so they'll get nominated. And those were the three, some of the, three of the four last people in the race on that side. It's just,
Yeah,
the Democrats made this as much as the Republicans did. They
completely.
they acquiesced to fascism, and they continue to do so.
I think that it's all good stuff. It's kind of old news today. One of the more current issues currently, politically current issues currently, is the French election that's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a very interesting political polarization going on. You've got Le Pen, who is essentially a national socialist. She is a fascist by every definition of the word, almost. She's got youth mobilizations in universities. She's
most of the cops over there are part of the Front Nationale.
Yeah, yeah. It really does have that the fascist twang to it. That Trump.
Oh, it's the same for the Golden Dawn too. They own the police over there. And what worries me, just to take it back to the American perspective for just a moment, because we're all about ourselves over here. But there's a national front forming over here, like I've told you just before. The which is made up of kind of Klan elements, Traditionalist Workers' Party, basically the the Super Friends villain roster, like bad dudes. But what did I want to say about Le Pen particular? Oh yeah, it worries me that the Patriot movement has such a huge sort of cadre within the cops, and they've got that interrelating kind of the Patriots movement loves the whole Blue Lives Matter bullshit, and they've got that the Threepers show up and the police love it because it helps them do their job. The 3%ers, militia, and that interaction really is. It kind of shows not only do liberals sort of depend on fascists in order to cement their own rule. They make them police, they make them army people and such. But that dependence on fascism actually helps them overtake the government, the liberal government itself.
Completely. So back to France. It's quite interesting. Right. So you've got Le Pen, you've got this fascist. The general opposition to that is quite interesting. You've got this guy called Macron. I'm going to anglicize the words because I wouldn't want to offend anyone with trying to put a French accent on. So you've got Macron, who's essentially neoliberal centrist, quote unquote, pro-EU from a capitalist perspective. Naturally, it's quite... the issues of being anti-immigrant and anti-refugee, it's quite prominent. It's not as explicit as Le Pen, but it's there. Then you've got Fillon, who's your everyday conservative, just your capitalist conservative. And he's polling at about 19%. So Macron's at about 24, Le Pen 22, Fillon 19. And then you've got this guy called Mélenchon, and he's very left, probably more left than Bernie Sanders was. He's calling for a sixth republic, which essentially is what they do is they get a constituent assembly up and redefine
what France is basically.
The French constitution to try and make it a lot more politically less politically dictatorial, because one of the terms being used is that it's a bit of a presidential monarchy, because in France currently the president really runs the show in a way that's quite unseen in a lot of Western democracies. Mélenchon's calling for a repeal on the labor laws, as in to go back to what they were. He's got quite an active working class agenda. There are flaws. He does pass out French flags at his rallies, and he sings the Marseillaise. So there's quite a bit of patriotic feeling there. However, we need to consider he is a left reformist. He's not a revolutionary. He never could be a revolutionary. He's a politician.
Right. It's the equivalent of a tree trying to chop itself down.
Yeah.
Or so basically the further the state gets to dissembling itself, the less power it has to dissemble itself. I
Right.
don't know if that quite makes as much sense as I thought it did in my head, but um, like you need to be able to forcibly stop bodies of the state from staying together, and the only way to administer that force through the state is through the state. So
Hmm.
as you dismantle parts of the state that don't have access to that body of force, all you're retaining is the hard coercion of the state. Kind of. So like, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think Mélenchon's an interesting developer. He's got 18%. That's the most recent poll of today. Obviously, all the polls are in the margin of error. I've seen some where he's been at 22%, along with Le Pen. This guy
Mm-hmm.
Macron's got 24th. For those that are unfamiliar with the French electoral system, on the 24th of April, you have the first round vote, and practically that's an all-in. Any candidate can be voted for. Then you have two winners of that. Those two candidates then go to election on the 7th of May, and from that point, the president is decided, determining on who wins that popular vote. It is interesting because Mélenchon really is this left-leaning reformist. He would put the class struggle. He would push it in a good direction. Would
Yeah.
never be the answers. There are plenty of flaws there. He doesn't have a hardline stance on Islamophobia. He's not explicitly anti-Islamophobia, which is very disappointing.
Yeah.
But in terms of the class struggle, in terms of putting a political system that would be more in favor of the everyday person. Obviously, political systems are inherently against the everyday person,
Oh yeah.
but more so, it would
And
be a good
avoid a
development, especially in the
fascist.
face of Le Pen. So it's interesting. It's not quite. He's certainly not a conservative in the sense that Hillary Clinton was, where the American response to a neo-fascist was to try maintain the system they have today and believe that can beat this right-wing reactionary change. That in France,
And
this guy
personally, I
managed
was,
gone
even
against
as
it.
an anarchist, I was for Bernie Sanders just because I thought he'd make people's lives better. And we need
Exactly.
time and resources in order to establish ourselves. And I mean, having people not have to work all the time would probably be helpful to revolutionary organization.
Completely. And I think as leftists, whether you're a Trotskyist, Marxist, socialist, or whatever, anarchist for sure, you want to alleviate the burdens of capitalism
Yeah.
from on the working class, and reformists can do that to an extent. They would never be the solution in Parliament. Would never ever be the solution. But it's important when we've got a guy who can put that class struggle to have a critical support. And I think as long as we maintain that critical support and never put our hopes in someone who does have left-leaning policies within Parliament, we can help the working class push the class struggle forward, and through that struggle realize that it is only up to us, the working people, that can realize the society that we want today.
And that is, no matter who we, I wouldn't say endorse. Well, maybe that is the right word. No matter who we're sort of taking the side of, we can't really, like you said, we can't depend on them to be our rescuer. Certainly not. I mean, Sanders wasn't going to be the one to, smash the state and dismantle capitalism. But and I've never been one for accelerationist arguments. Really, if you look historically, whenever we head into a fascist era, things get worse, and communists also lose a lot of power.
I mean, accelerationist politics, I think you can see the logic behind it, but it's quite a privileged logic to be able to have. It doesn't help the working
I
class,
mean,
and I don't think. And
you
I think
should probably
revolutions really
yourself
comes in
be
times of hope.
prepared to, suffer. Because a lot of the
Yeah,
time it's like people talking about other places they don't live, and they're like,
yeah,
accelerationism. Like,
yeah.
I actually don't know. Does Zizek... I don't think Zizek lives in the United States, but he was
No, he
saying that
doesn't.
about the election of Trump, and I was like,
Yeah,
fuck off.
yeah, I saw that.
Ugh.
I mean, Zizek's got so much wrong. I mean, with his cultural incompatibility, when talking about Muslims in Europe, I
Oh
think
yeah, God.
Zizek is
And there
not a
was
voice for
some...
the left.
There was some, like, stuff about gay people and their relationship to capitalism that was really bad, and like Zizek, I feel like his whole thing is that he essentially says something like inflammatory, and then when people are like, what the fuck, he's like, oh, but wait, I can argue
Yeah,
backwards towards a good point. um
yeah. No, I mean,
he even
any
said
any
something like...
so-called communist that gets added that gets attention in the mainstream media really should be looked at
critically.
apprehensively, because I doubt that the mainstream media would give a real revolutionary communist proper attention like they do
Yeah,
sometimes give to Zizek.
it, it, the only ones who get attention among us are this sort of harmless academics, don't really have
Or there's
revolutionary
painting violence
praxis.
negatively.
It's
Yeah.
all about being the right one,
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting time. We've got
Yeah.
a lot on our plate with Britain coming up. I think the results of the French election will either hinder or help Corbyn's
Yeah.
electoral chances. And I think Corbyn, as long as he doesn't capitulate to the right, which he may do, he's also to be critically supported to an extent, because I think he will
I hear from
alleviate the
some
contradictions
people
of capitalism.
he's a
Similar.
trot. I hear from some
Yeah,
people he's a
I heard
SOSDEM.
there was this speech that I'd read that he'd given that I'd read, and it was quite radical. I'll try find a couple excerpts from that now. Actually, give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, no problem.
It was really interesting. Some of the things he had to say. It's the establishment versus the people, and it's our historic duty to make sure that the people prevail. We don't accept that it is natural for Britain to be governed by a ruling elite, the city, and the tax dodgers. And we don't accept that the British people just have to take what they're given. They don't deserve better. I don't play by the rules, and if a Labor government is elected on 8th of June, then we won't play by their rules either. It is a rigged system set up by the wealth extractors for the wealth extractors. I mean, it's pretty radical stuff.
Yeah,
to hear from a British politician.
It sounds a little bit like he's talking about like class struggle, but he's just substituting some words.
Yes, he's not using explicit socialist and leftist terms, and I think that's a weakness. But it's also
it is in a sense
torn
a
apart in the
strength,
media
because a lot of people they get like a red flag, no pun intended, no pun totally intended, but whenever somebody says something that's kind of like hard left, they're just like, commie. Oh shit, I have to disagree with you. You're a commie extremist. If I agree with you, I'm not like an acceptable person. But there is a real fear about because the narrative they've got people believing in is that communists talk really ideal and nice stuff, and we talk about things that make sense, but in the end it'll all lead to Stalinist the Stalinist dictatorship.
Yeah.
No, you got what I was about to say.
Yeah, right. So, So yeah, I think in the French elections, if this guy Mélenchon even if he gets to the second round, it'll be really interesting to see how that affects what happens in Britain, and potentially if Le Pen gets in, how that might hinder him, or if it can be seen that the policies of Le Pen are not positive, that may also help the British people look. Conservative politics, neo-fascist politics does not work. We need to go for this more left leaning position that's oriented around the working
Labour
class. But I think one of the reasons why people are sort of apprehensive about voting left in politics is because the way politics is set up, it's set up for the capitalist class, and often they capitulate to the right, therefore failing the working people. France was a perfect example of that with the Socialist Party, quote unquote, failing the working people that voted for them, to the point where Hollande got down to a 4% approval rating, which is just absurd. All
we have to do is look at a place like Venezuela, where the leftist parties actually managed to turn the state entirely against capitalism, or at least established modes of capitalism, depending on what your views on state socialism are. But they managed to turn the state in that way, and yet the bodies of capital still held out their power and are still actually, to this day, building more and more strength to overcome the state. It was only a very temporary reprieve. And part of what they did was stockpile goods so that there were constant shortages. They undermined the system to make it look bad. And, not that... I mean, this is one of the big problems to begin with state socialism, is that it's... the state, in a way, is dependent on modes of capital. And so... if you don't interface with foreign capital, then you suffer. If you do interface with foreign capital, you give up control. And it creates this catch-22 where within this system, you can't actually act differently than the system dictates you have to.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that completely. Yeah.
So, thank you all for listening. Tune in next week when we'll cover whatever we cover.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for listening. Also, quickly, Patreon on Left Press, if you're able to contribute, that would be great.
Please do. I'll put it in the description.
Catch Nova's episode of Re-Educate. Is that what it's called, right? On the
Reeducate, but it's
Reeducate. Sorry,
it is
Re-Educate.
a pun on Re-Educate.
On the 22nd of the 4th. So if you're listening to this after then, which you will be, and you haven't seen that episode, I'd implore you to go check that out.
Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep the revolution strong.
All right, goodbye.
Peace. Today's featured song was Eternal Youth by Rude. Check them out in the link in the description.